sponsored by Raycon. 1998's Urban Legend is a bit of a paradox to me. It's the kind of horror movie that everyone seems to have seen, yet nobody actually remembers. It's not a misunderstood masterpiece or a forgotten cult classic, but it's one you've more than likely come across at some point in your life. Whether it be in a DVD bargain bin or on the shelf of the local video rental store or watching it during one of its many random appearances on early to mid 2000s late night TV, when I was young, I remember Urban Legend having quite a prominent yet unappealing presence that, when I finally saw it, it turns out I had already seen it too.
Someone's in the back seat!
In its time, it was critically panned as just another generic slasher looking to shamelessly bank off the popularity of Wes Craven's Scream, but ended up living more so in the shadows of Scream's most successful derivative, I Know What You Did Last Summer, which was penned by Scream's screenwriter Kevin Williamson based on the urban legend Off the Hook, and was produced by the same guy behind Urban Legend. In fact, apparently the film's first-time director Jamie Blanks wanted to direct Last Summer, but the role was already filled, and Blanks was later hired to direct another Scream-esque slasher in 2001 called Valentine, which itself lived in the shadows of Urban Legend. So what we ended up with was several layers of gradually inferior Scream knockoffs right up until Hollywood went, screw it, let's just fucking remake everything. Regardless, Urban Legend still performed pretty well at the box office despite lacking the blockbuster appeal of Scream and Last Summer, hence it really was a film much better suited to modest home viewing long before the age of selling schlock like this to streaming services.
Bloody Mary.
However, the bizarre thing is, Urban Legend is a surprisingly intriguing time capsule of the 90s slasher era, not so much for its quality, as it leaves a hell of a lot to be desired, but how it very lightly touches on the social dynamics of rumor and mistruth, and the potentially dangerous implications urban legends can have on people.
Anyone you know die this way?
Mikey, from the cereal commercial.
What if I told you that this is Mike? Alive and well and working as an ad executive in New York City. Would you drink some then?
I should clarify, this isn't necessarily a recommendation video, it's more so a look back to see what all the fuss was about, so take my efforts to make this sound appealing with a grain of salt, because I have an extremely forgiving soft spot for nostalgic crap like this. If you're in any way knowledgeable on the historical context of urban legends, the film's insights are going to feel really paper thin, but it works as a pretty cool entry-level look at the topic when we're treated to a lecture involving Robert Englund playing the abnormal psychology professor employed to be both our source of thematic exposition and obvious misdirection.
Something I can help you with.
If you truly want to see urban legends explored with much tighter focus on the underlying social concepts, 1992's Candyman is a vastly superior slasher, which conveniently was made by the same production company behind Urban Legend. Although even if the film wasn't the most informative example of urban legends in cinema, apparently in the 2012 book What Happens Next? Contemporary Urban Legend and Popular Culture, Gail DeVos claimed that the film certainly helped bring them to mainstream attention. As a general outline of the story, Urban Legend follows a college student called Natalie as she tries to uncover the truth behind a series of murders happening around campus, where each victim is killed in the conditions of popular urban legends such as The Hook, The Killer in the Back Seat, Aren't You Glad You Didn't Turn on the Lights, Pop Rocks and Soda Making Your Stomach Explode, and a bunch of them I've actually never heard of.
It's like someone out there is taking all these stories and making them reality.
Throughout the film, it references many other urban legends that do have a historical basis, but the main one the story centers around is its own original legend about a dormitory massacre where a knife-wielding psychopath murdered dozens of students before killing himself, and the dean supposedly covered it up to save the campus's reputation. Or at least that's what our douchey embodiment of Randy and Stu from Scream claims to have happened.
You betcha.
As along comes the equally douchey student reporter Paul to dispute the legend, as fabricated and embellished in different ways across different campuses in order to cause hysteria.
He is such a babe.
For a film that's so studio-controlled and conservatively manufactured simply to make a profit, it initially has quite a thoughtful premise that's then disregarded by typical slasher tropes. That's not to say the slasher scenes are bad, they just lack tension or surprise. They're at least somewhat creative, if indeed they are literally just recreations of said urban legends. The film is more akin to 80s slashers like Friday the 13th or Elm Street, where the death scenes are portrayed as twisted, elaborate spectacles, which to be fair was a welcome contrast given urban legends contemporaries were much blunter and deliberately unceremonious about death to emphasize the necessary brutality of the killings. Here, it doesn't weaken the horror because it's very aware that it's ultimately playing off a gimmick despite evidence of there being an infinitely better film buried beneath it. For example, you have a scene where our protagonist Natalie is actually tricked into killing one of the characters by making her think the killer is on the roof of the car and driving away only to tow a noose that hangs the other character. And then there's another scene where Natalie's roommate, an obligatory 90s goth girl who is known for boning her boyfriend while Natalie is still in the room, is strangled to death while Natalie puts in her earphones, thinking her roommate is just getting up to the old woohoo again. Wait, hang on a minute. Those aren't Raycons. Natalie, let me tell you what you're missing. If you're gonna lie in bed or on the sofa without disturbing your roommates, you might as well do it in the most discreet and comfortable way possible. The beauty of Raycon's everyday E25 earbuds is that they provide wonderful crisp audio clarity, quality bass, and solid noise isolation, while still allowing you to freely engage with others if you're one of those sociable people. And if people are not your thing, don't worry, Raycons fit right in your pocket for any and every occasion, so you'll always be prepared to block out the world and listen to your favorite music, podcasts, and the most delicious voice on the internet. I legitimately use Raycons every single day, and since I've been back at the gym a lot, I can bop my head about without my earbuds ever falling out. I still have my dignity, right?
Yeah.
With seamless Bluetooth pairing and 6 hours of playtime, I love that I don't have to regularly charge them, which is something I typically forget to do with all my devices. It's really as simple as popping them in, pressing play, and going about my day. Starting at about half the price of any other premium wireless earbuds on the market and with a 45-day free return policy, why not help out my channel today by clicking the link in the description box below or going to buyraycon.com/Ryan to get 15% off your order. And now, back to Urban Legend. Now, I want to say this very loosely, and bear with me when I say it. Urban Legend was technically just a little bit ahead of its time. Just you fucking wait, let me explain. Urban Legend came out in a time when the internet was really starting to explode in regularity across the globe. But when you look at it in retrospect, it was just shy of realizing how much market potential there was for internet myths when the Blair Witch Project came along 1 year later and capitalized on its growing popularity. Granted, the conditions for success were very different because Blair Witch benefited from being a found footage film to reinforce that feeling of authenticity. But Urban Legend basically squandered a potentially socially relevant premise for the sake of a cheap slasher flick, and if it came out around the mid-2000s, it probably would have had a bigger audience. After all, it predated today's widespread appeal of urban legends thanks to creepypastas and SCP lore and artists, storytellers, and tricksters sharing ideas with greater accessibility. The film indirectly tapped into social circumstances that were going to become much more prevalent in the age of social media. From around the mid-2000s, there was a growing effort to capitalize on contemporary layperson fears spawning from digital culture whilst lacking in subtlety. For example, before Unfriended and killer app movies and that shitty YouTuber movie about a killer emoji or whatever, we had slashers like Chain Letter, which played on the trend of having to share a message with other people or you would die, similar to The Ring, while Cry Wolf very lightly touched on the social dynamic of the harm rumors, gossip, and lies can cause to victims. That latter example is echoed in Urban Legend, but goes largely unexplored. It sets up this niche campus culture of spreading myths and rumors and performing pranks that make it more difficult to get people to believe when something bad does actually happen, hence the reference to the fable about the boy who cried wolf. It's then further compounded by two different scenes. Our douchey Randy Stew hybrid hosts a party commemorating the urban legend about the campus massacre, thus seemingly glorifying a potential real-life tragedy, while douchey student reporter Paul is reprimanded by the dean and campus security for supposedly fear-mongering and sensationalizing about the murder of another student, which comes with its own conflict of the dean trying to downplay and suppress the issue. What we end up with is a barrage of egos and voices that undermine the very real problem by detracting attention onto themselves.
These scratching noises on the roof. It's her dead boyfriend hung from a tree.
Additionally, on the topic of spreading urban legends, back then, since they weren't as easy to debunk due to lesser instant access to information and people being less desensitized, there was a genuine susceptibility to the grain of truth that surely the legend must have come from somewhere. I think they worked especially well in schools and colleges, as kids were either naive and gullible like myself, or consumed by culture shock that made these settings prime for immature attempts at fear.
Mikey likes it.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll give you an example from my school. There was this 3-day residential trip your class goes on, and every year this urban legend was spread about the Blue Nun, who was said to haunt the top floor of the manor your class stayed in. It sounds ridiculous now, but 2004 was a very different time, and nobody knows where the legend came from. The likelihood is someone's older sibling came up with it and it passed on through generations like legends typically do. Or maybe someone did have a really fucked up encounter with a nun choking on a potato, hence the title Blue Nun. I mean, it's Ireland. That sounded just as plausible before the age when everyone could just check their phones. Anyway, let's finally talk about who the killer actually is and why I think it's an unintentionally clever outcome. Spoilers to anyone now looking to watch the movie, so if you're planning on leaving, please leave a comment below to help feed the algorithm gods. So I'm not one of these critics who pretends like they knew who the killer was the entire time, because with these kinds of quickly produced films, it's almost always a guess. The brilliance of Scream was that it constantly threw misdirection at you and toyed with the idea of it being the most obvious suspect, whereas Urban Legend meanders its way to the outcome without any real web of intrigue. There's no reason to suspect anyone other than Robert Englund and the shifty-eyed janitor, but there are also obviously misdirections, and so when you look at who's left, you just blindly pick one. The answer's this girl, by the way. Why exactly? Well,
Lucky for you, Miss Thing, I've got a visual aid.
it's revealed earlier in the film that Natalie and her friend Michelle, who's murdered in the opening, were given a lenient sentencing of probation after recklessly killing a man during a stupid car chase prank based on an urban legend, and it turns out he was the killer's fiancé.
Brenda, please, you need to get help.
I have already tried therapy. Obviously, it did me no good, Natalie.
However, here's the thing. Remember that legend of the dormitory massacre I mentioned in the beginning? Yeah, none of that's relevant.
Very well done.
Fuck off, Jared. The core mystery that drives the story is a total red herring that reveals the killings to be far simpler than the characters assumed. Paul and Natalie go on this big investigation trying to uncover the truth behind the infamous urban legend, and it goes nowhere, and it ends up having nothing to do with the killer anyway. I think it's mainly designed to throw the characters off the scent, but the killings have little impact on the world because most of them occur on the same night, while the prior ones have a suspect, lack evidence or a body, and Natalie's roommate is assumed to have committed suicide. But the reason I think it's unintentionally clever is because it indirectly plays into the hindering influence urban legends have on truth and information.
Come on, Nat. Damon is the best practical joker on this campus, alright?
The protagonists are so focused on this grand murder conspiracy and trying to connect the dots based on rumors and myths around campus, but ultimately none of it matters when the killer is simply trying to seek vengeance on two people, one of whom is killed in the opening. There's no substance or meaning behind it, it's all purely myth disguising a completely different truth. This is going to sound wild, but if you've made it this far, I'm sure you can tolerate more of my bullshit. A surprisingly good comparison is actually the movie Hot Fuzz, where the protagonist in that movie puts together this complex narrative of conspiracies to explain how all the murders are connected, but the killer's ultimate motive is just pettiness for making the town look bad. It plays into this idea that our obsessive curiosity demands a satisfying explanation when there simply isn't one. Sometimes the real story is a bit shit, hence why we embellish it to make it sound more interesting to others, igniting a lineage of unsubstantiated changes and additions that spiral so far out of control that eventually nobody knows the real truth. By the way, this movie isn't as thematically deep or as complex as I'm making it out to be. It's an awfully written structural mess, but ironically, here I am trying to make this shit sound interesting, which kinda goes to prove the point about obsessive curiosity demanding a satisfying explanation. Hey, for what it's worth, you can do a hell of a lot worse when it comes to slasher flicks. And that's Urban Legend. It's your basic slasher, but isn't without its charm. It did spawn a trilogy similar to Last Summer, where the first sequel released shortly after and had a weaker theatrical run, while the third was a direct-to-video supernatural flick that came out a few years later. In fact, one of the directors behind Grave Encounters is currently working on a remake, so it's not being completely forgotten. If you have seen it yourself, let me know about it in the comments below, and if there's a strange relic from your past you want me to cover, let me know about it as well. And until next time, stay safe, stay away from parkas, and I'll see you all next time.